Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Welcome to today's President Lecture Series featuring David Ono. My name is Jay Zambrano. I'm the Vice President for Advancement and University Relations here at the University of Houston downtown, and I have the privilege of working alongside President Blanchard and other esteemed UHD colleagues to produce these very important events here in our community. As many of you know, the event is a series of lectures and discussions that bring together the university community to reflect on topics that are relevant and important to all that we serve. Today's topic will be a discussion that will hopefully deepen our understanding of the Japanese-American experience during World War II and the significance of storytelling in bringing important history to the forefront and keeping it alive. The University of Houston downtown prides itself on being an institution where ideas and perspectives are welcomed and shared through these type of platforms. It is these important platforms that we get an opportunity to listen and interact with leaders of industry, policymakers, plus local and national experts and award-winning journalists today that will be better informed and equipped to take on the challenges of an ever-changing world. Before I ask our two distinguished guests to come up onto the platform, it is my great pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Lauren J. Blanchard, President of the University of Houston downtown, to share his welcome and greetings. Dr. Blanchard.
Good, is it morning or afternoon? I don't think this microphone is on, by the way. So good morning. I'll still claim it as morning, yes. Good morning, everyone. We're so thrilled to have all of you here today. The reality is that, as I was mentioning earlier to one of our guests, that we have been running these lecture series now since I've been here. And so this, I don't know the exact number of the installment, but we're probably close to 20 of these lecture series that we have done. And you know, the beauty of it for me is that they just get more and more, not only important, but most importantly, impactful. And really what these are designed to do.
But it's impactful in terms of really understanding what happens all around us, both historically and currently, that we really need to ensure that we're building not only a sense of awareness, but then also understanding that a lot of the topics that we have heard about and that we embrace here through these lecture series calls us to action as well. In terms of our understandings of what has happened in the lives of people today and in the past, and how we're all interconnected in our work around social justice. And so we're really thrilled today to have David Ono with us, whom I know that the story is not one that feels good, but the reality is one that's a reminder to us of what we have to continue to do to make sure not only that we're building awareness, but that we're very conscious of the circumstances of people and how we can play a major role in not only embracing that, but ensuring that some of history doesn't ever repeat itself. And so each installment of our President's Lecture Series aims to bring thought-provoking content from informed guests whose work sparks both conversation and inquiry. This May, as we celebrate Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month, we elevated the historical and contemporary contributions, achievements, experiences, and perspectives of Asian Americans, Native Americans, and Pacific Islanders to our own American story, which is a multi-layered story shaped by a diverse tapestry of citizens. Today's guest expert, Mr. David Ono, will dive into that tapestry, acknowledging the historical trauma of Japanese internment during World War II. Through his researched insights, I am confident that we will not only grow in knowledge and awareness, but we will also find ourselves inspired by the resilience of the survivors' stories. I will hold off on providing any introductions because I know that we're going to hear very shortly not only more about the moderator, but Mr. Ono himself. I thank all of you for being here today, and without further ado, I turn it back over to Jay Zambrano.
So before I introduced our moderator for today, I would be remiss if I didn't call attention to this, but we couldn't do these events without financial support, but also the community support and the networking that we do through our community. So we have a special person in the audience that I want to make sure that everybody gets to know, and we give her the recognition she deserves. But I want to say thank you to Donna Cole, who's our sponsor for today, and also the glue that got us all together and made this happen today. So again, Donna, please, let's give her a round of applause. Thank you so much. Thank you. So I'm going to introduce our moderator. Maya Shea is an award-winning journalist here at ABC 13 in Houston. Currently, Maya's focus is covering Houston city government as well as breaking news story of the day. Maya graduated from Syracuse University and has worked in television as a reporter in New York, Alabama, Kansas, Michigan, where I think her biography says where it snows from November through May, something like that. It doesn't snow anymore. Yeah. Yeah. So since joining the Eyewitness News team in '02, Maya has covered every story imaginable. She's traveled to China. She's followed the Houston Rockets as well as our mayor. Her memorable assignments include the 2008 presidential election, traveling to Brazil, Korea, and Japan. She also covered the 2017 presidential inauguration in Washington, D.C. Away from work, Maya is heavily involved in the Houston community. She has moderated a number of community panels and often serves as MC for a variety of events. Maya is married to State Representative Jean Wu, a friend of UHD. They have two wonderful children, Winston and Lyndon, and their dog, is it Mei Ling?
No, we have a new dog.
Okay. Okay, sorry. Okay, they have a new dog. So anyway, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, our moderator for today, the one and only Maya Shea.
Oh, thank you so much. Hi, everyone. I'm thrilled to be here. I'm thrilled to be here with my friend David Ono. And David is a native Texan. He told me not to read his entire bio, but I will just say that he's a phenomenal anchor in Los Angeles, one of the most influential TV markets in the country. That is where the movers and shakers of Hollywood and industry watch the news. And when they want to know what's going on, they turn on the TV, ABC 7, and watch David Ono. And away from his day job, he does things like this, telling great stories, going out and get those stories, and really, this is really your passion, right, David?
Yeah, thank you, Maya. Hello, everybody. It's nice to be back in Texas, and I really appreciate that. You know, it's weird how this all happened. Growing up in Texas, I was, just to give you some background, I grew up in San Antonio, graduate of Jefferson High. I went to North Texas. Back then it was called North Texas State. Shows you how old you are when you don't even have a college that has the same name anymore. So
The mascot's the same, though, right?
Mascot's the same, the Mean Green Eagle. So I lived, when I was living in the Dallas area, is when I first got into TV, and I got an internship at the NBC station there. And they hired me to do what's called Chiron, where it's the computer that pops people's names up, or puts your score up, for sports. All right, $3 an hour. And I didn't realize how important that was at the time, because all the other interns at the end of the semester left. But because I was an official employee, I was now working in the TV business. And it was remarkably lucky, because from there I worked my way up to be a producer in a couple of years. And then I got my first anchor job in Midland, Odessa, Texas. And then I moved over to El Paso, my second anchor job. And then that's when I left, and I went to Sacramento for a couple of years, and then I ended up in LA almost 30 years ago. So to get to your question, when I got to California, and I'm Japanese American, so people hear my name, David Ono, and the Japanese American community would reach out to me and say, can you MC this or do that? And then when I'd show up to these community events, they would say, were your parents interned? Did you have any, relatives in the 442? And I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. I had never heard of internment. I had never heard of the 442. And then, as a journalist, you kind of deal with a little bit of shame for your ignorance. Especially me. I mean, I'm an anchor, I'm a reporter, by then I was doing it for years. I actually grew up on military bases.
You have the name. I mean, you sort of look the part.
I looked the part, right. But I was completely ignorant. I had this huge blind spot to what I knew about this chapter in history, because my family actually is from Japan. I was born overseas, and I came here when I was a year old. So, and we ended up in Texas. So that is my background and why I didn't know anything about it. My family didn't know anything about it. And then that's what got me to start thinking about what do we teach and how do we teach it? What do we find important in our history books? And as I learned more about what happened to Japanese Americans during World War II and how their civil rights were violated, in addition to that, they were thrown into these concentration camps. And I know people some people take offense to the use of the word concentration camps, but they are truly exactly that, concentration camps. They were thrown into concentration camps even though they were law-abiding citizens. And it was out of these camps that these remarkable soldiers volunteered to fight and die for the very country that locked them up. And I found that remarkable. And not only was that willingness, in my opinion, remarkable, but the fact that they were such great soldiers. And to this day, they're considered the greatest fighting unit in American military history for their size and length of service. And yet, when's the last time you saw a movie about them? Or when's the last time you've seen a TV series about them? They've been completely ignored, not only by our history books, but by Hollywood as well. And why that is important is because there's no better way to get a mass audience and teach somebody about a chapter in history than to put it on a movie or a series and say, look what they did. That's never happened. So I take all of this together. And being a journalist, at least my advantage is I can take my ignorance, I could get beyond my ignorance, and I could learn more about it, and then I could start telling the story. And so for the last 25 years or so, granted, I tell a lot of different stories, but this is one that I kept going back to and back to and back to as I learned more and more about it. And so that's what kind of led to all of this new stuff that I'm doing.
This new stuff, or your show, docudrama, we call it documentary, live stage show combination, is really phenomenal. We had a production last night at the Alley Theater. There's not a dry eye in the house. Everybody was crying at the end. But we have a clip of one, you've been taking this on the road, if you will. Yeah, and one of your great, you had a fantastic audience at the Kennedy Center.
Right, we did. Actually, Kennedy Center was a memorable show because we wanted to make sure we did it on Veterans Day in November. And it was risky because, number one, people on the East Coast don't know who I am. Number two, there are very few Japanese Americans, so that nucleus of audience that might find it interesting weren't going to be there. And so it was a gamble to go into this storied theater, the Kennedy Center, perhaps the most storied theater in America, and hope we could fill it up. I had these visions that 23 people would show up, but we sold it out. And it was a tremendous audience, a tremendous show. And it was kind of reassuring to me that maybe we can get more people who this story is not about, but willing to give it their time and learn about it.
And we have a clip from the Kennedy Center production. Give you an idea, sort of the highlight reel of your show.
It's like a little sizzle reel, little moments from the show.
I see a light in your eyes, though you feel alone. There is a hope that never dies in you.
Believing in the American way. Work hard, abide by the law, love and protect your country, and you are entitled to the fruits of your labor. You are an American. But it doesn't always work out that way. Historically, our country at times has failed, sometimes catastrophically. And how we treated Japanese Americans during World War II was certainly one of those chapters. The U.S. brass made it all heartbreakingly pointless. In this remarkable old film, you see a fleet of U.S. bombers reduce the Abbey to rubble, something that could have been done on day one, before a single life was lost.
I'll be there to light the way with the love here to stay. I will be your compass, strong and true. My
Georgia Hill sits just above the coastline, and you could see its strategic value. Capturing it would rest with a mighty 100th. The Germans were dug in at the top, ready and waiting. They had been successfully defending this position for months, and this would be a violent fight. And that picture he had in his pocket was sent back to his mother as she sat behind barbed wire. But now, it's stained with his blood. And by the end of the war, the American brass credited the MIS with shortening the war by 2 years and saving countless lives. That's how invaluable the military intelligence service was.
Tearful eyes on the horizon low, watchful gaze through the trees below, fearless souls guide them safe from shore, through fire and smoke, Nisei brothers endure.
We now move to France in a fight so incredible it's considered among the most legendary battles in U.S. history. It's October 1944. The Vosges Mountains was a perfect place for the Germans to set up a defensive line. You see the mountains and the dense forest to help stop our forces. The Germans were desperate because the next border, just a few miles away, was Germany.
That is just the highlighter. Yes, give me a clap.
I could explain a little bit, just to
Yeah.
give you, that's a little sizzle reel. I think it went a little bit too long. Sorry about that. But what I wanted to do was, well, this all started as a speech. I got asked to talk to a group of veterans, actually, and family members of these particular veterans. And at first I said no, because there's nothing I could tell them that they didn't already know and actually teach me. But then I started to realize, being a journalist, and I had some trips planned, I thought maybe I could show them the battlefields today and what they look like. And what can we learn from going back into those communities today? So that's what this show is about. We kind of fly you all over the world, from France to Italy to Germany to Japan. And we kind of show you their legacy from the beginning of the war to the end. And in doing so, we meet the people and the communities that still are moved by the Nisei because they liberated them and how much they adore them. But then you compare that to the fact that Americans don't know who they are. And that we have not put them in our history books, and we have not done any movies or TV shows about them. But in creating this speech and the visuals, then I thought that it would be kind of interesting and experimental to reach out to a music director and put it to some music. And so that's what you see there, is kind of the melding of these ideas, but it happened over like 3 years of this kind of evolution. I never thought I'd be on stage doing a musical, by any means.
Well, I first saw this 2 years ago during one of the Asian journalist conventions, and it was just stunning. And I remember seeing it going, oh my gosh, we got to, have it in Houston, and I hope lots of people see it around the country. But even from where it was 2 years ago to what we saw last night is really sort of changed. Kind of tell us a little bit about your sort of creative process. I think the visuals are, as you said, just stunning to see all these battlefields the way it was, the way you were able to blend historical video with contemporary images, your interviews, how you time like what you say live versus what's on video, and compare, and then juxtapose that with the live music is really, really, really compelling. How did you figure it out and put it all together?
The first experiment was actually doing that speech, and then in doing so, we saw, like I thought the audience might hate it. It's a big gamble, but they loved it, and so from then on, we started realizing that maybe this new way to tell a story, maybe there's value in that, and we don't even know what to call it. I mean, I think we've kind of settled on docu-theater, but who knows? You know, I don't know. But it's teaching us how this melding of art and journalism and maybe history, maybe there's something to that when it comes to capturing an audience and holding them and letting them more than learn the story, but feel the story. And so as we do the show, we kind of learn what appeals to people, what resonates with them, what moves them. We come up with new ideas, we sample it, and then also we change it according to where we go. Like we did 3 sold-out shows at the beautiful Hawaii Theater in Honolulu. It's about 1,500 seats, and we sold them out in literally minutes. And they loved the show, so we created what we call an aloha version of this. The singers are a little bit different, the music's different. We put a ukulele in there. We talk more about the 100th, which originated out of Hawaii and their background. And then we go to San Francisco, we bring it up to the Palace of Fine Arts. The MIS, Military Intelligence Service, was one part of the Nisei Soldiers' legacy. And their first classrooms are literally less than 1 mile from where I was sitting on the stage. So we talk a little bit more about that and the importance of what happened there in that community to the story. So we're able to meld it. Like last night, we had the wonderful Leslie Tramer, whose father is Erwin Blonder. He's passed, but he was actually rescued. He was in this battalion that got surrounded by the Germans, and it took the Nisei and this incredible gallantry to get them out and save them. He was one of the soldiers saved, a Texan, and he's sang their praises ever since, and now she carries the torch for him, so she spoke last night. So it kind of connects the story to Texas as well. So that's kind of how we do it when it comes to this. But I think in the long run, what we've stumbled on is a different way to tell a story. Granted, we can't, it's not like we're going to put it on TV and reach 1 million people, which is unfortunate. But what we can do is the people we can get into a theater, we can move them. And I guarantee they won't forget it. And it could be a different way to tell other rich stories around America.
And what have you learned sort of as you traveled to tell these stories? Because if you just watch the show and if you knew a little bit about, say, television production, I mean, we have 2 cameras right here, 2, 3 cameras just to record this speech, that it looks like you would need a whole team behind you to make some of this, what we saw happen. But you're just like, it's like you and one guy, right?
Right, it's me
Yeah. I mean,
and my director, Dylan. So I go on stage and I talk. Dylan is the guy. He actually brings a little unit. It's about all of this big, about the size of a laptop. And he plugs it into any theater, and it's his switcher. And we have all the video loaded in, so it's like a 2-man team. Then you see the music. We have a music director, and we wrote the music. The music's all original. I know nothing about. I played saxophone in junior high. That's as far as it goes. But I reached out to him, and the original version that you first saw had copyrighted music, which is really cool. All I did was load this show up with all my favorite songs, you know. But as it grew, we knew that we probably needed to create our own music. So I hired these wonderful composers who did it for cheap, and I wrote the words, and it's a little bit.
You wrote the lyrics.
I did.
I didn't know that.
But it's a little cheating because all we did was, since I had the first original part of the show built with my favorite songs, I just told the composers, that's the kind of mood I want to create. can you give me a different melody that's not going to get me sued? and then I'll do my best, and I'll find some help, and we'll write the lyrics. And that's it. All came together. And at first, I would have thought this is an impossibility, but you start to realize, or what I've realized is, this is about coalitions. It's about finding people to help you. I have a vision. The only thing I know how to do is write and talk. That's my only skill level. That's all I have. So I have to find somebody to shoot. I have to find somebody to edit. Dylan's going to switch. He also shoots and edits too. And then I found these composers who love the story or want to be involved in something unique, and they help out. And so what I'm learning, and then we, like Donna Cole, this show would not have been come to Houston if it wasn't for Donna. So you make your friends. You find the people who put these coalitions together, and then we target places like we'll go to Seattle, and we're going to go to Chicago, we'll go to New York, we're going to Arkansas in 2 weeks. And so, and each one of those shows is community members who like the message and are willing to help. And that's what we've discovered, is this thirst to want to do and make the country a better place. And they feel like these kind of messages get us there.
And I feel like you're talking about making the country a better place. And what's so impactful about your storytelling is you're talking about something that happened 80 years ago. But there are so many contemporary notes. And why it's so important, places like UHD have you come and talk about it, because we don't want history to repeat itself. And yet we see those Asian hate messages that come across, especially during COVID, the political rhetoric. Also, you know, what we've seen a lot across the country most recently is these anti-alien land laws, which are out there. Basically, states are passing individual laws that says Chinese people can't buy land, right? And they say, well, it's just Chinese people who are Chinese citizens and may have a green card. But as you know, as we all know, the reality is when someone passed that law, like it's being fought in Florida right now, that you can just be an Asian person with an Asian face. You can be here 4 or 5 generations. You walk into a realtor's office, you walk into a bank to get a loan, that law has a chilling effect. You know, because the realtor's not here, they don't know how to be an immigration officer, but they're like, oh, I don't know, if I have to decide between the non-Asian person, this person to buy a house, which one's easier? And they're trying to pass that law right now in Texas. So, like all these battles, sometimes you feel like, hey, didn't we already fight that? And you're still trying to fight that today. So I feel like what you're trying to do is so important, because it reminds us where we have been and where we don't want to go.
Right. Let me try to be as concise as possible and kind of tie all this together. Number one, going back to what we teach, it's vitally important. The scenario that she's illustrated, also books that we're banning, stories that we're banning. We need to be really cognizant of how dangerous that is, and how there should never be a logic in the less you know, the better. That's a really flawed logic. So when it comes to this story, the Nisei soldier and what happened to Japanese Americans during World War II, it's really not our or this community's story. It's an American story, and we're all connected. The reason I begin my show and I end my show in Ellis Island, even though that's not even accurate to Asians, most Asians came through the West Coast. They didn't go through Ellis Island. But Ellis Island is important because it really is the symbol of America as a melting pot. And we were a country that was built on immigration. We needed immigrants to come here. We embraced them. It was a grand experiment. It still continues. But it's really what does make America great. You even look at some of the unbelievable inventions and things that we use within our daily lives. Most of them have come from immigrants or offspring of immigrants. People who come with a work ethic and a willingness to commit everything to being a good citizen and making the best of their lives. So with that said, we talk about the Nisei, but what I've learned is the Nisei story is almost the same as the Chinese American story, what African Americans have gone through. I created, everybody, it's nuanced. Some stories are worse than others, but everybody's dealt with the hate. Italians have dealt with it. Germans have dealt with it. in the early days of immigration. Irish have dealt with it. Catholics have dealt with it. Hate has been spewed at almost any community that can be isolated. In my investigations, the underlying tone of everything, and this is the most important word, and it's stereotyping. The Japanese Americans were stereotyped because they look like the enemy. And the hardest part for Americans who weren't Japanese to get was that just because they were of Japanese descent does not make them the enemy. They were born here. They loved their country. They were Americans. If you want to measure how absurd it was to lock up 120,000 Japanese Americans during World War II, and the vast majority were Americans that were born here in America, the vast majority. There are 1.2 million Germans in America that actually came from Germany, that were German immigrants, not born in America, not even American, and they weren't locked up. There were 3 million Italians that were born in Italy and came to America and were not American citizens, and they weren't locked up. Who they locked up were Japanese Americans because they looked like the enemy, yet the white potential enemy was never locked up. It was stereotyping. It was hate. They looked like the enemy. We hated them. You go back further, there was already this hate towards Asians in America. If you look at the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, we desperately needed Chinese labor to come here and help us build our railroads. And they did. But as we accomplished that goal to get to the West Coast, we started worrying about, we as in this country, started worrying about what are these people going to do here now? We already didn't let Chinese women come because we did not want them to multiply here. What are we going to do with them now? What if they keep coming? And so we started to build this hate towards the Chinese all the way to the point where we finally had a law that specified a specific type of person can't come to America. Chinese people. And to this day, it's the only law we had that isolates one particular kind of person. But it started creating this yellow peril, this hate towards Asians, and that kept growing. And then we get to World War II and the hate for Japanese, another Asian community. But these chapters kept going and going and going. If you want to find commonality that you don't think are common, but yet they're connected, then think about that. We want to get rid of Chinese. We've locked up Japanese. When the AIDS crisis happened in the early 80s, what did we want to do? We wanted to lock up every gay person because we felt they were going to infect us. That literally started going through some of our upper echelon of leadership. We got to get rid of these people, or we got to at least isolate them and get them out of our community. When 9/11 happened, we started hating Muslims. We stereotyped Muslims. We called every Muslim a terrorist. That's exactly what Japanese Americans went through. So you see the commonality over and over and over again. Do we put that in a history book? Do we connect the dots in our history books and say, you got to watch for this? If you start seeing it again, hate towards these Chinese land laws, if we start seeing history repeat itself, the reason it repeats itself is because we are ignorant to what has already happened in the past. And that's why we can't start banning these stories. We can't stop. We got to start putting more of these kinds of stories in our history books. And yeah, they're dark, they're painful, but it's really the deeper lesson on how we could all be better as a society. I mean, if one of the richest stories in America that we need to teach is what happened to African Americans. And it's not slavery. I mean, slavery is so egregious that that's pretty clear. It's what happened after slavery when they were freed. And if you look at the first elections after the Civil War, where multiple African Americans were elected into office, and white America went crazy on that, they started realizing they're going to start, these former slaves have power now. And that's when we started going into the Jim Crow laws. And those Jim Crow laws started ripping that power back away, started restricting them from getting to the polls, started taking their power away so they can't ever get to where the white people were in America. I mean, it's a really dark thing to think about, but that's exactly what happened. Does anybody know why blackface is considered horrible? You know, we heard one of the key anchors on NBC a few years ago say, "What's wrong with blackface?" She was doing a segment on people doing for Halloween. The reason blackface is wrong, and I know most people don't know this, but it's based on a minstrel character named Jim Crow. And this minstrel character started in the 1830s, and it was created by white actors who wanted to be funny, who put blackface on their faces, black makeup on their faces, and they went on stage and they acted like an idiot. And people started thinking that that truly was a reflection of black people, that idiotic, stupid behavior. So they started creating laws called Jim Crow laws because of that black character. And those Jim Crow laws squashed the African American community for 150 years. And so when they say, what's wrong with blackface? That's what's wrong with blackface.
And here, like I just think about today, right? UHD serves such a diverse student population with people from, all over the world, different walks of life, coming here, getting education. And many of them are first or second generation immigrants. And we're very close to the border. So the whole issue of, are you being quote unquote invaded, or do we need to build another wall? That's also in the forefront of our daily news coverage and conversations and political debate. And that's very painful as well for so many people. It feels like all this is somehow different, but yet still tangentially related.
Well, let me kind of steer this away from the difficulty of politics today and just talk about habits. If you look at how politics works, if you go into looking at politicians from the 1800s to the early 1900s to today, the one thing that they always do, I'm talking about Democrat and Republican, all across the board, they isolate the enemy and they tell you that they will keep you safe from them. Vote for me, and I am the person to keep you safe. We saw that with the Chinese Exclusion Act. We saw that with Japanese Americans. That's another thing about this Japanese American story is members of the Supreme Court who voted against Japanese Americans and said, lock them up. Years later said that was one of the most egregious mistakes I've ever made. I was so wrong, but you get caught up in the hysteria and the fear, and it ruins your ability to think clearly and truly think about the American Constitution and how that is built to protect us. And yet in times of fear, we choose to throw that out the window and use fear as the excuse to squeeze somebody, to squash somebody. And that, it's not just the Japanese Americans, it's so many different communities. And sometimes when we get to these things, they're invading us across the border, the rapists and their drug dealers. We got to be careful because you're stereotyping people. You're putting everybody in one lump thing. And that is the fundamental foundation for prejudice and hate.
For the people in our audience who are looking at what you've produced, what you're talking about, and riveted by your story and the work you've done, kind of think about, how do you get started if you want to make a difference in your community, in your own way? I mean, you were saying that your talents are mainly just talking and reading things. I would beg to differ. I would say you have a few more talents, but I think we're all talented in our own unique way. How do we find our voice and move forward to make a difference in our community?
That's a great question because I think we start with ourselves and your own family. Interview your mothers and fathers and grandmothers and grandfathers. Find out what your own history is. And then when you start to learn your history, number one, that's good because when you lose those family members, then you've lost a huge hunk of their experience in those early years. And that's a travesty. So you learn about yourself. But then once you've learned about your own story, then you start finding that commonality. Well, who else shares a similar story? When did your relatives come to America? Why did they come to America? Maybe they didn't come to America. Maybe you're African American and they didn't have a choice. Maybe you're Native American and you're the one who's been invaded. Either way, you learn your own story. You know, and it's like, this doesn't mean to be dark either. It could be a joyful thing. It could be something that really makes you proud. In a way, that's what I feel like I was doing with the Nisei, even though I was kind of living vicariously through them. It's not my family story, but I felt I was learning something really important. And by learning their story, then I started getting into all these other chapters. I mean, one bridges to another, bridges to another. It's not like I suddenly knew about, you know, Jim Crow laws or why blackface is wrong. I got there after investigating the Nisei story. You know, in doing this Nisei story, I actually stumbled upon, I'm like, who else has been squashed during World War II? And the story of the Filipinos who were asked to fight for this country and then thanked by the President of the United States with a letter at the end of the war, and then all their benefits were taken away the very next year. They were promised benefits that every veteran gets for fighting for this country, yet theirs were taken away because they're on an island somewhere out there, even though they're considered American citizens. That's one story. I stumbled across top secret documents used in the U.S. Army Officers Academy. And this is an officers academy that MacArthur went to, Patton went to, Eisenhower went to, one of our presidents. And what they taught you about African American soldiers was, it was a 62-page document, but they summarize it in 5 points on the very front page. I don't remember them specifically, but I'll tell you generally. Number one, it says African Americans are intellectually inferior. It said they are cowards, but they can be led into action. You can train them not to run under duress. But think about that. This is what every white officer is learning at the start of World War II. And if you look at the record of the African American in the war, they weren't actually allowed into battle, except for some rare cases, one tank division. We've heard of the Tuskegee Airmen. Until late in the war, because of attrition, they said, we need more men on the fronts. So they finally let African Americans to fight. Before that, they had the worst duty, latrines, picking up body parts and sending them home. It was demeaning. And the reason was they didn't trust them as soldiers because of that stupid and flawed study. And I run into that because I'm studying Nisei soldiers and trying to find other soldiers who have commonality. And then what I found out was we were fighting Hitler with a segregated army. We were fighting the biggest white supremacists in the history of the world with our own segregated army. Kind of absurd.
And yet, here we are.
And here we are.
How do you feel like it's changed you and your purpose doing discovering these stories and putting all of this together? I mean, you're still the big anchor man in LA.
It stresses me out because I feel like, well, I got to tell that story. You know, it's one of those things where, you know, you snoop around history books. I think about my own background. I think somebody's got to kind of do it, right? And I know there's a lot of journalists out there, but our industry is kind of, hate to use the term, but caving in. You know, less and less people watch TV. Granted, we're making adjustments and we're on digital and we're doing, you know, platforms or whatever. But the beauty is everybody can be a journalist. Everybody can help tell a story. You have so much accessible to you to shoot stories, to edit stories, to tell stories. Think about when I first started in this industry. I mean, nobody could afford an edit system. Cameras were super expensive. You couldn't do that. You really had to beg a big company to hire you so you even had access to equipment. And then all of you have it in your pockets. So there are so many more opportunities for you to be a journalist or tell a beautiful, poignant story. So it doesn't necessarily have to fall in a few people's shoulders. It could be everybody's. It's everybody's responsibility, but be truthful and be accurate. And that's part of the problem is there's so much information out there, but there's so much that is wrong or biased or slanted because they want to pull more people into their tribe, their needs, whatever they find is important. So at least try to be as honest about it as possible.
And I think we want to take a few audience questions. So we'll do that in a second. But I was going to just ask you, what's your next? Do you have a next shoot planned for the Nice? Do you have another location you want to visit? Some other interviews?
I am going to go back to France in October. They're having the 80th anniversary of that big battle, the rescue of the Lost Battalion. But there's so many people who are going to be showing up, and I've found one woman who has all these letters from her uncle back and forth in the war until the letters suddenly stopped. Beautiful letters, because he was killed in that battle. But I know a historian who knows everything about that battle. So I sent him her information, who the soldier was, and he knows the very spot he died and how he died. So she's going to go out there, and I'm going to go with her, and we're doing some other things. But that's just one of the things, to get that human side of the story. And so now it's the point where we no longer can live the story through the veterans themselves because they basically have all disappeared. Now we find other ways to live the story, and maybe it's through his letters and his family members who are still here with us to help tell this story. And you kind of mentioned this earlier. This isn't just history lessons. This is kind of connecting people to today. How do we use their message today? And like in my show, I show you the adversity these guys had dealt with, the incredible bravery they had, and then I juxtapose that to today's world and the fact that we're not only bringing these guys back to life, but we're bringing their courage back to life. And if they can do what they did and fight for a country that locked their innocent families up and fight in such an incredible way, then we could use them as our barometer on how to be courageous when we need to be courageous. I look at, being in the news, you look at the subways video that might come down and it's an 80-year-old woman who's getting beat up by somebody, and people are pulling out their phones and shooting it as opposed to actually getting in there and helping her. And I feel like those are the moments that you need that courage to do the right thing. Don't sit back and let it happen and then talk about it. Grow some and get in there and help her. And I know it's difficult and it's scary, and you don't know if that guy's armed or not, or what he's crazy, or you don't know what's going on. But that 80-year-old woman is looking for you for some help, and it's not coming. And I think about the Nice soldier, and I'm like, that's where we can find some inspiration. That's where we can all be a better person.
How many are still alive today? Do you know?
I would say about a dozen or so, 15 maybe, if we're lucky. They're almost all gone.
But you managed to get a number of them on video interview, and it's just so moving.
Yeah.
Do we have any audience questions? Does anybody have questions?
It doesn't have to be mean or heavy. I mean, we could talk about something funny, too.
Just funny things did happen. Donna?
So I saw Glenn Gondo this morning, and he said, who funded David in all of this research when he started out?
Oh, yeah. I fund it. That's why I travel for cheap. That's why I only have one guy helping me, But, it's remarkable how much you could do on a little bit of money, just a little bit. Granted, plane tickets cost a lot, but over time, you do it over time. So in the early days, I would fund everything, and now I started a nonprofit a couple of years ago. I got smart, and now I could at least apply for grants to help offset the costs. So that's the way to go. If you ever want to do stuff like this, start a nonprofit. You only need 3 people. Have a very clear, idea on what you want to do, but then apply for grants and stuff. And there are people who are, if you become an actual nonprofit, then you can ask people who do have money and are in positions who want to do good things. Maybe they just give you the money, they get the write-off, and then you could use that money for the greater good.
But we had talked briefly about just, I love to see this in Hollywood, but the grants between getting grants and doing your production versus getting Hollywood, you're talking about a lot.
Well, that's one of my biggest pet peeves because, this story, you can imagine if there's a band of brothers about the Nisei soldier. I mean, it's the same as the Band of Brothers, and they fought, in fact, some of the same battles and are equally remarkable. But then you add that extra layer of the civil rights issue where they're doing this while their families are locked up in concentration camps. And that's kind of like, well, why didn't we do that? But the problem is, for decades, and I don't need to tell you this, Hollywood, you've heard of whitewashing, until this last few years where, thank God some of the more recent Oscar winners and getting attention are Asian-oriented. Because for many decades, Hollywood had a very clear thought or understanding that if it has an Asian face, it's not going to make any money. War movies are expensive to make it look real. If you want to do Saving Private Ryan, can you imagine that movie with these guys? But you also need $100 million. The same thing with Band of Brothers. And there's no Hollywood studio that's going to tell you, I'm going to spend $100 million and expect the masses to come and watch a bunch of Asian faces. That was their understanding. It's changing now. But the sad thing is, if the movie ever does happen, if the miniseries ever does happen, there won't be a Nisei soldier left to see it.
Other questions? Oh, okay. Donna has follow-up.
Sorry that I have one more, but I love the fact that you're talking about civil rights in our history of all ethnicities, right? And one that the Mexican Americans and Mexicans, those 7 years in 29 and 32, deportation of 3 million back to Mexico, that was terrible.
Yeah, and that kind of smacks back to what I say is everybody has the same story almost. In a way, if you look at any person of color, you can find these chapters that nobody knows about. And then it's like when people say, I want America to be back to what it was in the 50s, the good days, the good years. Well, if you're an African American or a person of color in the 50s, those weren't your good days. They weren't. It's about perspective. And the fact that we don't know that about America, those are the chapters that are hidden. And that's where our huge blind spot is. That's where a huge amount of ignorance is. It's like, they're good days for some people, but not everybody. So don't act like, let's make America what it used to be. Because what it used to be is filled with prejudice and hate.
Other questions? Yeah.
Resistance to message. Yes. Well, I'll tell you this, and maybe I shouldn't say this, but in the early days of, and I'm talking about 20, 25 years ago, when I started getting, I don't know what do you call it? I'm not sure if I can call it success or attention, but I started doing more and more of these stories. And it's particularly the Japanese American story. And the Japanese American population is teeny weeny. It's
And when you're
very,
talking
very
about
small.
doing this specifically, just airing it in local
Air
news?
it on the news. And I remember certain members of management that aren't there anymore would say, can't you do something more mainstream? Can't you do something that maybe affects more people? That more people would be interested in. And I'm like, no. I do those stories too, but these stories are super important and we all learn something from them that we all could take away from it. It's not that they were being mean by any means, but they were narrow-minded on the importance of these chapters in history. I think we know a lot more about why these chapters are important now, but back then there was a bit of a pushback. And they wanted me to use my ability to tell a bigger story that might affect more people. But they didn't quite understand that point. And it's the whole reason why representation in newsrooms is super important. Because if you get a diverse newsroom, then you have diverse experiences, backgrounds, and people that can bring something else to the table that we're not talking about. Instead of the old days where a bunch of white men choosing to do white men's stories. You know what I mean? Those are important too. But we have to understand everybody's story. And it's a better world today.
There's one back there. Paul.
David, it's really good to see you here.
see you, Paul.
One fun question, and this is really fun because you just talked about this. What is two things? One is the most memorable interview you've ever done with somebody, and the second one, what is the most memorable story you've ever done? We have an award-winning Emmy Award journalist here, so I would like to hear that.
Wait, how many Emmys have you won, David?
31.
Yeah. Wait. And the second question is, because we talked about it yesterday, how many Murrows have you won now?
12.
All right. Just a few.
My answers may be kind of lame. Probably my most memorable interview is with President Obama, and it's more of the reason. I met him in Israel when he was just a junior senator. Nobody knew who he was. And I was there covering Ariel Sharon's stroke. So we ended up in the same hotel we just kind of happened to run into each other. Then I covered him on Super Tuesday when he suddenly came out of nowhere to get ahead of Hillary Clinton. We realized we're not going to have, we have a different Democratic nominee. His first year in office, he calls and asks me if I would sit down with him at the White House. And I'm like, wow, that's kind of cool. Sure. But, it's not me. It's no testament to me and my abilities. The reason he called was because I was anchoring the #1 show in Los Angeles, which happens to be the show that everybody in Hollywood, his big donors, watch. So it's intelligent because he can get his message out there. And this is when he's going through a fight with Boehner over the debt ceiling. And remember all that? It still goes on every year. But why I find it memorable is I've done this for so long, I don't get nervous anymore. I don't get nervous. I thought no big deal, but as soon as I sat down in that White House and he's sitting across from me, I'm like, and then, I'm good. I don't ever carry notes. I think, then all of a sudden, luckily I had notes. I started, do you still agree? It was one of those things. I was like, that's why that is memorable. It took me by surprise and how nervous I got, in front of them. And that's kind of like the main reason of that. And then it reminded me how kind of human I am and how even though you might think the job gets routine, it doesn't get you routine. Number two, and this is going to be really surprising, my most memorable story is one I'm still working on, but I've done some versions of it. It's this crazy, for lack of a better term, ghost story that's been happening in a house for 30 years in this community called Mount Washington. It's in one of the oldest neighborhoods in all of Los Angeles. It's completely unexplained. It's a whole different time to sit down and talk about it. But we're actually making a big project out of it because it's so crazy with 2,000 photos and hours of video, and we've let detractors or people who say this is BS, we let them into the house and they're all like, oh my God, I don't know, I can't explain this. So it's really, and the reason it's not, the reason this is going to give you a preview in case you ever see this on
I'm waiting for another docu-show.
on Hulu
We'll bring you
or
back to
Disney
that one.
Plus or something like that. And it may be there in a year or so. And that is, it's more an examination of how little we know about life. How little we know. It's an existential examination, in other words. We don't know what we were before we were born or where we go to after we die. There's not a soul on this earth can tell you emphatically what is or isn't. We also don't know anything about our universe. And so when I run into a story like this that is so absolutely unexplained and confusing, I feel like it's a reminder of that. And in a way, that humility and that lack of understanding of what life really is, I feel like is a great reboot for all of us in life. When we take things too seriously, when we decide to have enemies that we will refuse to negotiate with, when we get too serious and caught up with just being who we are, I feel like we all can be reminded that we maybe don't know enough about what life really is. We might want to get along more. We might want to not take ourselves too seriously. And then I kind of feel like this is one of those stories that has those kinds of undertones, kind of reboots how we look at life. So that's it.
You believe in ghosts? Huh? Do you believe in ghosts?
To be honest, I'm skeptical. I don't know what this is. I mean, I do approach that journalistically because I am one of those people that needs more proof, you know? So that's another thing, and that's part of my existential examination with this story is I don't know what's happening, but I'm not going to call it a ghost either. I'm just going to say this is weird. That's all I'm going to say. This is weird.
Question right there.
Question here. You're a journalist and an excellent one. Would you comment on, I guess, the future of journalism, particularly as young people are not watching the mainstream news as they used to? I guess of a certain generation I am, and I've watched you and all of the network coverages through the years. But millennials, they don't know, they didn't know that it was storming and as bad as it was in downtown Houston the other night because they don't watch the news. What do you say to them?
That's a great question because journalism is in crisis right now. It absolutely is. And part of it is the fact that, yes, some people, young people don't watch mainstream. And why I think that's important is because if you get your information via social media, it is so biased. And it's really, really hard to understand how biased it is or whether something is even accurate. And I know there is so much negativity towards what's called mainstream media. But just to put it in a nutshell, objectivity and accuracy is the most important thing for a legit journalist. If the truth is the truth is the truth, and it's as simple as that. Some truth is a bit ambiguous. Sometimes it's confusing. So that's why you always want to present the other side. But you want to be fair about that. Eliminate what your thoughts are and be fair about that. Mainstream media still uses that as their guide. They still have to be beholden to the fundamentals of journalism. Otherwise, you can sue them and sue them big, right? And that's not the only reason. The journalists don't do it because they're scared of being sued. They do it because they want to be considered a great journalist. And they believe in the responsibility. I'll give you an example. Oh, God, should I even say this? But I'm going to say it because it's facts. Do you remember okay, so there's one court case still going, but there was the other court case with the voting machines going on. And
The Dominion voting machines.
The Dominion. So they sued for $1 billion, Fox News, because Fox News knew it was inaccurate, what they were saying. And it's the day before the trial was to begin, and I was heartbroken over this, Fox settled. I wanted the trial to happen. I wanted to hear the inner workings. I wanted to see the texts and the emails that were going through that entity as they knew the information they were putting out was false. But they settled out of court, so none of that goes out there. There's another big case, even bigger, still floating, and that could happen. But this is what hurts journalism as a whole because people lump all of us together. Well, there is an agenda there. There is a bias there. I'm sorry, but there is. And so I feel like the more we know about that bias, the more we could make our own determinations on what news we want to gather, how we want to absorb it. And I'll always say this, get your news from multiple sources, just so you feel better about what you're reading and learning. And if you do that, you'll start to see patterns. You'll start to see bias in one and objectivity in another. But always get your information from multiple sources, and that will help you, and it'll help you be a more informed and better American.
Go ahead, Cecilia.
So, David, you mentioned about starting your nonprofit. Yeah. What's your next project?
Well, I got a bunch. So I'll just, how do I say this?
Any you can tell us
Some
yet?
of our secret, but I'll do more of this. I do more in the civil rights realm. And how do I say this? I would love to tell you. The ghost thing is going to be something.
Stay tuned.
I found a gentleman who has a rags to riches story. He came to America with $50 in his pocket. And now through education and hard work, he makes a lot of money. Well, he takes that money and he goes in the black market and he buys human slaves. But he does it to set them free. So it's a heavy, deep, deep story. I'll leave it at that, but it's going to be a big project of ours.
Sounds exciting. We got a question right here from this gentleman.
I learned about the idea of the horrible event of Japanese internment through a very privileged, ridiculous place, and that's social media as a white male on social media through George Takei, right? So, if it weren't for Uncle George, as he likes to be called, I wouldn't know about Allegiance, the musical. So, have you seen it, and what ties might there be?
I have, and I know George well. And George has actually taught me a lot about this as well. He's a dear friend. The beauty of George, and I think what resonates the most to me about George Takei. Do you know who we're talking about? George Takei, he was Sulu on Star Trek, and he truly was the first kind of mainstream Japanese-American star in history. And he still uses that platform to teach, which is wonderful about him. Well, he talks about he was as a child he was thrown into one of these internment camps, and he remembers having to say the Pledge of Allegiance in class as the flag is going up. Yet he's behind barbed wire with a machine gun pointing at him, because they had these machine gun nests that were kind of faced inside. But I think the message that I got him that was most interesting was actually about his father. And he said, and this is fundamental to George and why maybe George does what he does. But his father was a Japanese immigrant who always said, democracy takes work. It's not for lazy people. You have to not sit back. You have to participate in the democratic system. You have to vote. You have to be informed. Lazy people live in a totalitarian country where one supreme leader makes all the decisions, and you just sit back and you take it. But in democracy, it's about everybody participating in your own way. Make sure to vote, make sure to be informed. And so his father was so informative to him, but also to me in hearing those stories, because then as I see George, the way he lived his life from then on, I could see how that message resonated. And that's a great deal of wisdom for any American, no matter what your color is. That's exactly spot on to what democracy is. Democracy is not for lazy people. It takes work. And that's what we all have to understand in order to make sure this works properly, including being properly informed.
And George just came out with a children's book about internment. Yeah, we had it on pre-order. It got to our house, so we're going to read it to our boys. More questions? Any more? If not, I think we're about time anyway. You got any final thoughts and wisdoms?
Well, I just want to say thank you so much. It's really fun to talk to people kind of openly and honestly. I hope I didn't hurt anybody's feelings. I hope I didn't get too political. I hope you understand that this is just me trying to be honest to you. And I really appreciate and I'm touched by the fact that you're here and willing to be bored to death by my stories. Thank you.
We'll have to bring you back for another edition of your docu-drama stage show and invite everybody here and they'll come go see it.
Thank you very much.
Well, it's been an honor to be with all of you today.
Yeah, I do have one quick one. When do you expect these projects to be completed, like the Ghost one and the next one?
I'm hoping by early next year. Oh, yes, ma'am.
Does your foundation take donations?
Of course.
Yeah.
It's
tell us where to go, David.
It's
Yes.
called Story Boldly. Story Boldly. In other words, be courageous about telling your story. Yeah, Story Boldly. Thank you so much for asking.
Thank you all. Jay?
I told David last night, it was the first time I got to meet David, and I told David, I've seen your picture across our campus for the last month as we've been promoting this, and you, like you said earlier, you get nervous when you met Obama, and I've got to meet a lot of people, but yeah, there was a little bit of starstruckness happen yesterday. So, what a pleasure to have these two here, our own Maya Shea, and of course David, and so. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And again, Donna, we greatly appreciate this. Again, we hope that we see you on campus a lot, So we definitely would love to bring you back. But again, to everybody that came out today, this is the type of events that we have. Spread the word to all the other faculty and staff that couldn't make it. And hopefully we'll see you all in September or in October when we celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month and we do it all over again with another exciting story. So I know that there's a few gifts here. I know Shaya's going to help me out here. A little token of appreciation to our folks. And I believe also we've got some lunch for you two to take, because I know you got a plane to catch and Maya's got the news to tell us later on today. So, but again, thank you so much for coming out here. This concludes our lecture series for today. We'll see you at the next one. Have a wonderful day and stay safe. All right, bye-bye.